Welcome to the world of Dreamside Traveler. Here, beneath the soothing sound of gentle rain, we journey through time and space, uncovering the mysteries of the past and diving into the most captivating pages of human history. This place is created for those who love exploring the world in the quiet of evening, for those who value peace while yearning to discover something new before sleep. If you enjoy what you're hearing, please give this video a like. It helps other people find our stories. Help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers in our club of nighttime history lovers. And the Dreamside Traveler channel will become your faithful guide to sleep. We're constantly adding new stories for your peaceful evenings. And if you have ideas about which historical topics interest you, or simply want to share your thoughts, leave comments below the video. I'm genuinely curious to know what inspires you. Now close your eyes. Feel this gentle rain outside your window. Allow yourself to relax. Our journey begins right now. Imagine a world before borders, before maps drew lines across the earth. In the far north, where the wind bites and the rocks stand like old bones beneath snow and storm, something wild was waking. From these rugged, wind-beaten lands, now known as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, came a people who would set all of Europe astir for more than 3 centuries. They weren't a nation. They weren't a single tribe nor a race. They were a force, a storm with 100 names. We call them Vikings, but they called themselves simply folk, or people of the north. Rising out of those deep fjords and dark forests, they became known, loved, hated, feared, and remembered for lifetimes. Their story really begins in the 8th century, when Europe was still shivering in the shadow of Rome's great collapse. In the south, new kingdoms and churches were growing, but the north kept mostly to itself. The land was hard, the winters long, and life balanced on the edge of hunger. These northern folk were farmers, hunters, herders, and crafters. They raised cattle and sheep, planted barley, spun wool, and huddled together for warmth inside timber longhouses, fires crackling, stories echoing in the smoky air. But the land was never generous. A single harsh winter or a greedy local chief, what the Norse called a jarl, could bring ruin. So the Norse built their hopes as they built their boats, sturdy, clever, fast. Generation by generation, the skills of carving long, slender ships passed from parent to child, and so did a hunger for something more. When you have little to lose, the sea begins to look like a road rather than a wall. No one knew then that they stood at the start of an age that would change the world. It began, as storms often do, with a sudden, blinding strike. In the year 793, as the world counted it, a group of northern raiders swept down on the peaceful Lindisfarne monastery off the coast of Northumbria. They killed, they took treasure, and they vanished back into the sea, leaving a stunned silence behind. To the Christian monks, it seemed like a punishment sent from angry heavens. The old chronicles record terrible omens filled the land, a great famine, fiery dragons in the sky. But the truth was more direct and more frightening. The North had come calling. Soon, raids like this became not a terror, but a pattern. For decades, sleek dragon-prowed ships slipped up rivers and along coasts, appearing where no one expected, striking like thunder and disappearing before any help could arrive. Churches, villages, towns, even great cities, all learned to fear the sudden white sails on the horizon. Yet the Vikings were never only raiders. That's just the storm's opening. What made them powerful was their ability to adapt. They could fight fiercely, but also trade, farm, settle, and rule. The same men who burned a village one year might return the next to marry, build, or buy land. Some became mercenaries for great kings, or bodyguards for emperors in far-off Constantinople, which they called Miklagard, the great city. Did you know that the city of Dublin was founded by Vikings? That their blood runs in the veins of English and even Sicilian royalty? Their ships carried warriors from Norway west to Scotland, Ireland, and far-off islands with strange names: Orkney, Shetland, and the Faroes. They sailed until they reached Iceland, a land of smoke and fire, and then even Greenland, and, incredibly, North America, which they called Vinland. From Sweden, their cousins journeyed east, slipping down broad rivers through forests and steppes, trading furs and silver with Slavs, Greeks, and Arabs. These Norsemen, called Rus by the people they met, lent their name to Russia. They made their way as far as Byzantium and even Baghdad, bringing news of the icy north to ancient worlds. Denmark, too, grew mighty. Its kings stretched hands across the sea, winning land in what is now England and France. A group of Norse settlers founded Normandy, the land of the Northmen. And from there, one of their descendants, William, would become conqueror of England in a single, stormy year. But the Viking world wasn't just about conquest. It was woven with stories of gods, giants, monsters, and fate. They believed that every life was a thread in a great tapestry. Odin, the one-eyed wanderer, traded his eye for wisdom. Thor, his son, protected mankind with his hammer, summoning thunder and fighting trolls. Freyja, goddess of beauty and battle, rode a chariot of cats. And Loki, the sly, laughing trickster, tangled up the fates of gods and men alike. To a Viking, to fall in battle was to rise again in Valhalla, the hall of the brave, where feasts never ended. The greatest disgrace was to die in bed, forgotten. Their poets, called skalds, kept memory alive, spinning tales in verse, their words as sharp as sword blades. Even their stones speak. In Scandinavia today, you can still find runestones, tall, rough monuments carved with strange letters, marking victories, kin, or just a reminder that Eric was here. Each stone defies the wearing away of time, a whisper from another age. But all storms pass. By the 10th and 11th centuries, things began to change. The world was shifting. Where once ships carried warriors, now they carried priests, merchants, and new ideas. Many Viking rulers, like Harald Bluetooth, whose name you'll find blinking on your phone, accepted Christianity. Churches rose where Thor's hammers once hung. The old gods faded slowly, sometimes with violence, but more often as a new faith brought hope and unity to scattered people. Change did not come overnight. Some old beliefs and rituals lingered for generations. Some kings, like Cnut the Great, Harald Hardrada, and even Leif Erikson, the discoverer of new lands, lived between worlds, honoring the past while steering toward the future. Historians often say that the Viking Age ended in the year 1066, when King Harald Hardrada fell at Stamford Bridge in England. It was a bitter, bloody fight, and just weeks later, the English would fall to the Normans, themselves, in truth, children of Vikings. After that, great Viking armies faded from Europe. Their kingdoms were absorbed, their ships left to rot, their sagas closed. But listen, the Viking spirit didn't die. It lingered in the Norman lords who shaped Europe, in royal bloodlines, in the restless drive of explorers and rebels who sailed out toward unknown horizons. Their runes, myths, and stories echo in our words, in the days of the week, even in technology and popular tales. Who were the Vikings? They were everything a person can be: explorers, fighters, farmers, makers, poets, dreamers. Their lives were full of contradiction and color. They gave us new lands, new legends, new ways of seeing the world. For a time, they made all Europe look north in wonder and fear. And now, as you settle beneath the stars, let the gentle sound of waves and distant song carry you back. In dreams, the long ships still glide across cold, silver water. The wind is sharp, the night alive with adventure. Sleep well, traveler. The Viking Age may be gone, but the story and the dream sails on. Imagine the first rays of a cold northern sun slipping through wooden shutters. You hear the slow creak of a longhouse as it wakes to another day. A Viking home was not silent. There were whispers, children's feet thumping the earth floor, the crackle of the morning fire, and the soft clink of tools and combs. Life in Viking lands was not just storm and steel. It was laughter, chores, little arguments, and the steady rhythm of survival. Forget the old stories about dirty, wild barbarians. In truth, Vikings cared about being clean almost as much as being brave. Archaeologists still find small treasures buried for centuries: tiny tweezers, sharp razors, smooth nail cleaners, even ear spoons, and most of all, combs. So many combs, carved from antler or bone, with patterns like leaves and waves. Vikings brushed their hair often and bathed at least once a week, usually on the day they called Lørdag, washing day. Some places had hot springs, many had bathhouses. In these steaming rooms, neighbors would gossip, laugh, and wash away the worries of the week. Both men and women cared for their hair. Hairstyles changed. Sometimes the sides were shaved, the top long and wild, braided or loose in the wind. Beards were worn with pride, trimmed, sometimes decorated with beads or small rings. People dressed in layers, wool tunics over linen, dresses with aprons pinned by shining brooches. Their world was not just gray and brown. They dyed their clothes with plants, making ochre yellows, deep blues, lively greens, and reds from madder root. They loved jewelry, arm rings, neck rings, pendants, all engraved with stories, with magic, or with swirling lines. Looking good wasn't just for fun. It was a way of showing who you were, where you belonged. It showed pride, honor, and even told if you were married, wealthy, or part of a clan. Order mattered in Viking lands. Their world had rules, not just strength. They gathered at meetings called the Thing. Imagine a field, voices rising in the cold air, everyone debating, arguing, deciding together. Laws were recited aloud from memory by a special person called the law speaker. If someone stole, hurt a neighbor, or broke a promise, the whole community judged. Punishments might be fines, being sent away, or, for the worst crimes, being declared an outlaw. An outlaw lost all protection, anyone could harm them, and no one would be punished. Even so, these rules helped keep peace. Viking women were strong too. They could own land, inherit farms, divorce a husband, and speak at the thing. Their voices mattered. They managed the household, raised children, made cloth, brewed ale, and cared for animals. Some women traveled, traded, and even fought if needed. They wore keys at their waist, showing they were guardians of the home. Some were wise women called volvas, who made medicines, told the future, or spoke to the dead. Their power was memory, magic, and mind. Children learned early how to help. Some fed chickens, gathered eggs, or fetched water. Others listened to stories by the hearth or played outside, their laughter joining the sounds of animals and tools. Games often imitated adult life, pretending to row a ship, make a shield wall, or chase raiders with wooden sticks. As they grew, children learned skills, carving, weaving, singing, even fighting. Mealtimes were a mix of hard work and celebration. Food was simple but filling. Barley or oat porridge, thick stews with herbs and root vegetables, dark bread from clay ovens, and smoked fish or meat when luck and skill allowed. Butter, cheese, and milk from cows, goats, or sheep appeared on most tables. Some foods were stored for the dark months, dried or pickled, buried in the earth to keep cool. Special occasions called for feasts. Then everyone ate their fill, drank mead or fruit wine, listened to poetry, music, or the wild boasts of warriors. A Viking feast was more than food. It was laughter, arguments, games, stories, and new bonds. To feed a stranger was to make a friend. You might think Vikings were always fighting, but battle was only a part of life. When war came, they fought cleverly, forming shield walls, moving together, covering one another. Surprise attacks, ambushes from rivers or forests were their secret weapon. Not everyone could afford chain mail. Many fought in simple leather or heavy wool. Weapons mattered. The sword was special, named and cared for, a true treasure. Axes and spears were common and practical. Sometimes, if words could win the day, there was no fight. Compensation, clever negotiation, or even a marriage could end a feud. Some Vikings journeyed far, working as bodyguards for great rulers in Constantinople, the shining city they called Miklagard. Imagine Norsemen in silk-lined armor, guarding gold, speaking strange tongues, far from snowy forests. Their greatest invention was the longship, a marvel of wood and craft. Sleek and shallow, it could cut through open sea and slip up narrow rivers. No port was needed. Vikings could land almost anywhere. Painted shields lined the rails, carved dragon heads glared from the prow, and every plank whispered of distant adventures. On these ships, men and women cooked, mended sails, told stories, sang songs to keep time, and gazed at the stars, dreaming of lands beyond. When a Viking died, the highest honor was a ship burial. The body placed in a boat with weapons, tools, and treasure, sometimes set aflame upon the water. It was a return to the sea, a gift to the gods. More often, graves were simple but filled with love. A comb, a brooch, a favorite tool to remind the spirit of home. The days were busy, but not without beauty. Smoke rose from chimneys, cows lowed, hammers rang on iron, children's voices echoed from the fields. Evenings brought quiet moments, a mother humming to a baby, a father showing a son how to sharpen a blade, friends sharing stories by firelight. Imagine now a young girl, her hair braided, watching the horizon as the sky blushes with evening. She holds a small wooden comb carved by her grandfather. Around her, the world is both ancient and familiar, full of work and dreams, laughter and hope. This is the true story of the Vikings. Not just warriors, but families, friends, and dreamers, living and loving in the heart of the North. In the world of the Vikings, tales of Shieldmaidens swirl like mist over cold fjords. Picture women who chose the sword instead of the needle, armor instead of an apron. They braided their hair tight, laced on boots, and stepped onto the battlefield beside their brothers and fathers, braving the same sea spray and facing the same dangers. They weren't just stories. They were legends that shaped hearts and memories for centuries. For a long time, people believed Shieldmaidens were only myth, the inventions of poets and skalds, woven into sagas to entertain around smoky fires. But then, a grave was found. Not just any grave, a warrior's grave in Birka, Sweden. Dug up more than 140 years ago, it was full of treasure. 2 horses, 2 swords, shields, a game board for military strategy, and a full set of weapons fit for a leader. Everyone simply assumed the bones belonged to a man. After all, who else would be buried with such honors? But in the year 2017, science whispered the truth. The bones belonged to a woman. She wasn't just buried with weapons. She was buried as a general, a leader among warriors, honored with all the symbols of strength and command. That discovery sent a ripple through history. It forced scholars and dreamers alike to ask how many more stories, long dismissed as fairy tales, might hold a grain of truth. The sagas are alive with fierce women. There is Hardrada, whose name rings through the centuries. In one old story, she rides into battle, her shield gleaming, fighting alongside the legendary Ragnar. When her husband became too arrogant, she proved sharper than any blade, striking him down with a spear hidden beneath her gown. There's Brynhild, a shield maiden and a Valkyrie, whose love for the hero Sigurd became a tragic legend. Their fate twisted and turned through battles, betrayals, and even beyond death. Imagine a Norse Romeo and Juliet, but with swords and runes and the whisper of ravens. Some women, like Freydís Eiríksdóttir, did not always wear armor. When enemies attacked her camp in Vinland, far across the ocean, she stood her ground, pregnant and alone. She seized a sword, struck her chest, and shouted so fiercely that the attackers turned and ran. There was Herborg, who lived disguised as a boy, sailed as a warrior, and demanded a magical sword from the ghost of her own father. These women were not common, but they were possible, and in their stories they became real. Viking women wielded more than blades. They ran vast estates, managed trade, and even ruled as queens or regents when men were away or lost to war. Some were priestesses, known as Valvas or Seeresses, who carried the respect of all. They read the threads of fate, guided warriors, and spoke to the gods in rituals lost to time. Magic was their craft, but wisdom was their greatest strength. Do not forget Gunhild, mother of kings, wife of Eric Bloodaxe, famed for her sharp mind and her sharper tongue. Some accused her of dark sorcery, of cursing enemies to death, but maybe that was just the fear of powerful women echoing down the years. Shieldmaidens were not the rule, but they were never just dreams. The Viking world was wild and complicated, full of contradictions, just like the people who lived in it. Some women fought. Some brewed beer or tended to children. Some built ships, delivered babies, sang songs, carved runes, or sent their enemies running with words alone. Over time, the world changed. Kingdoms rose, old gods faded, new faiths arrived. Yet the story of these fierce women did not end. Their spirit flickers in place names, in family lines, in old songs sung softly on winter nights. Their courage lives on in the way. We still celebrate rebellion and freedom. In every tale of wild seas and wind in your hair. So as you settle by the warmth of a quiet fire, close your eyes and picture it. The smell of stew, the gentle hum of a comb through hair, the laughter and secrets drifting through a Viking hall. Beyond the window, ships wait, and somewhere out on the water, a shield maiden stands, hair flying, gaze fierce, sword bright, aflame against the frost, carving her own saga in the northern night. The religion and mythology of the Vikings fade in the north, where winters stretched long, and stars burned sharp in. The icy sky, the Vikings dreamed of gods not distant and untouchable, but close, fierce and flawed, entangled in fate just like themselves. Their world was not a calm. One, it was vast, mysterious, and alive, with forces beyond understanding, so they made sense of it the way all humans do, with stories beautiful, brutal, hilarious. Tragic stories. These stories were not written in books, they were told in firelight, whispered on ships, carved into stone, woven into memory, and they formed the spiritual framework of Viking life. This was their religion, not a rigid dogma, but a living, breathing mythos. Let's begin where they did before there was anything, no stars, no people, no gods. There was only a vast, yawning nothingness called Ginnungagap. On one side of this emptiness was Niflheim, the realm of ice cold, and mist on the other, Muspelheim, the land of fire, ruled by the fire giant Suda. Where the ice and fire met, they sizzled, they dripped. And from this cosmic slush emerged the first being, a massive, hermaphroditic frost giant named Ymir. He was not cute, Ymir sweated out more giants from his armpits, romantic, I know. And from the frost and the melting rime also came a cow, Al Dumla, who licked salty ice blocks, and in doing so freed another being, Barry, ancestor of the gods. Fast forward a bit, and Bur's descendants, particularly Odin, Vili, and Vi, looked at Ymir and said, "No, let's kill him," and they did. From Ymir's corpse They built the world. His blood became the oceans, his bones the mountains, his skull the sky, his eyebrows became a fence around. The world of humans, Midgard, at the center of all things, stands Yggdrasil, the great ash tree, its roots and branches connecting the 9 realms. These were the layers of reality. Asgard, realm of the Aesir gods like Odin and Thor. Midgard, the world of humans. Vanaheim, home of the Vania gods, who are more about nature and fertility. Jotunheim, land of the giants, always making trouble. Niflheim, cold and misty. Underworld, Muspelheim, realm of fire and chaos. Elheim, home of the light elves. Think sparkly chaos. Svartalheim, or Nydelia, home of the dwarves, master smiths. Helheim, realm of the dead, ruled by Hel Loki's daughter. At the base of Yggdrasil are 3 wells, Udar, Bruna, Mimir's, Bruna, and Velmar, which nourish the great ash tree with their ever-flowing waters. Udar, Bruna, is the well of fate where the Norns dwell. They are the Fates, 3 women who spin measure and cut the threads of life. Not even the gods can escape them. Yggdrasil is not just a tree, it is the world itself, and it is constantly under threat, gnawed by serpents, pecked by eagles, whispered to by a squirrel named Ratatoska, who basically stirs drama between the creatures living in its branches. Yes, a drama squirrel. The gods of Norse mythology are not perfect. They are not all-powerful. They are us turned up to 11, bigger, messier, mightier, and more doomed. Odin, the all-father, one-eyed raven-bearing cloak, draped, king of the gods. He sacrificed his eye to drink from the well of wisdom, and hung himself from Yggdrasil for 9 days and nights to learn the secret of runes. He's cunning, poetic, terrifying, and more interested in knowledge and fate than in warm hugs. He rules Valhalla, where half of the bravest warriors go after death to feast, fight, and prepare for the final battle of Ragnarok. Thor, the Thunderer, the peoples champion, red-bearded, strong-armed, and constantly smashing giants with his hammer Mjolnir. He rides a chariot pulled by goats, has a short temper, and is basically the god of both weather. And don't mess with me, he's not the sharpest axe in the shed, but he is loyal, funny, and loved by everyone from sailors to farmers. Freya, love, war, and witchcraft. A goddess of beauty, fertility, magic, battle, and war, because why limit yourself? She rides a chariot pulled by cats, wears a cloak of falcon feathers, and receives half of the slain warriors in battle. Odin gets the other half. Girl power, she is a Volver, a master of Seta, nor sorcery, and deeply connected to fate and femininity. Loki, the trickster, he's hot, he's clever. He's Chaos, son of a giant, blood brother to Odin. Loki is the one who makes everything worse, and then occasionally fixes it. He is the father and sometimes mother of several wild beings, including Fenrir, the wolf, Jörgander, the world's serpent, and Hel, goddess of the dead. You love him and hate him. He is necessary, and also probably stealing your stuff. It's not all feasting and flirting. Norse mythology is laced with the knowledge that everything ends. Ragnarok, the doom of the gods, is a prophecy, not of if, but when, according to the seers, one day the wolf Fenrir will break free and devour Odin, the world serpent, Jurang Gandanda. will rise and poison the sky. Loki will lead an army of giants. And the dead, against the gods, the sun and moon will be eaten by wolves. The world will burn, the sea will rise, everything will end, and then a new world will rise, green, fertile, peaceful. 2. Human survivors. Lith and Lithrea will emerge and begin life again. Because even in Norse myth, death is not the end. The Vikings didn't worship in the way we might imagine. They didn't go to church every Sunday. Instead, their spirituality was woven into everything: oaths, rituals, blot, animal sacrifice, burials, runes, and festivals. They called on Odin before battle. They wore Thor's hammer for protection. They whispered to Freya in childbirth. The gods were not far. They were here, walking the same muddy roads, demanding honor, bravery, and offerings. The line between human and divine blurred deliciously. So what was Norse religion? It was a living story, raw, mystical, and grounded in the harsh, beautiful realities of northern life. It was the fire in the long house, and the storm at sea, the whisper in the trees, and the scream of a battle cry. It taught that fate cannot be changed, but you can choose how you meet it. It was blood, bone, and breath. It was poetry carved in ice, and it's still alive every time you whisper, "Let me tell you a story." Now sleep, my dearest dreamer, let the stars shine down like the branches of Yggdrasil, and let the gods keep watch as you dream of thunder wolves. And the end of everything followed by the peace of beginning again. Now let's meet the most famous and legendary Vikings, from Ragnar Lothbrok and Erik the Red to Leif Erikson. And Cnut the Great, these famous Vikings are recognized as the fiercest warriors in our history, and they still capture the imagination worldwide. Ragnar Lothbrok, the legendary Viking who walked between myth and once, long before clocks ticked or borders carved up the land, in a world where the wind told secrets to the fjords, and sea mist drifted through the pine forests, there was, or perhaps there might have been, a man named Ragnar Lothbrok. His name lingers like echoes off mountain stone, as sharp as a sword's ring on a shield. Who was he? Warlord, farmer, king, myth. The truth is a tangled skein of all these things, knotted by legend, woven by poets, and passed from fireside to fireside across 1,000 years. Let's begin with what the sagas whisper. Ragnar's life is a grand puzzle, part history, part fairy tale, and every bit irresistible. His story drifts through old books like the tale of Ragnar's sons and the lay of Kraka, stories written down long after his supposed lifetime in the 9th century. They paint a portrait of a man who was not just a warrior, but an adventurer, a trickster, and the kind of rogue whose eyes always held a secret. The legends claim Ragnar was the son of Sigurd Ring, himself a hero and a king. As a boy, Ragnar was shaped by the cold north, where young men won glory not by birth, but by daring, by sailing to the far edge of the world and returning with a tale. Ragnar was clever, bold, and of course striking to look at, as every good saga hero must be. His ambition was like the northern sea, wild, deep, impossible to contain. Ragnar's heart, they say, was as busy as his sword. He married not once, not twice, but at least 3 times, and each story is a saga all its own. His first love was Lagertha, a shield maiden whose courage could break armies. In battle, she fought beside him, saving his life. He fell for her fierceness, and they married. But as time wore on, their paths drifted apart, and he left her, as men sometimes did in those old, hard days. Next came Thora, daughter of a nobleman, guarded by a serpent so fierce that no one dared approach. Ragnar, ever the dreamer, covered his legs in hairy animal skins coated in tar, faced the beast and slew it, winning both her hand and his famous nickname Lothbrok, meaning hairy breeches. His final and perhaps greatest love was a slog, wise, mysterious, possibly descended from dragons and Valkyries herself. With her, Ragnar fathered sons whose names would shake Europe. Ivar the Boneless, silent and cunning, Bjorn Ironside, as strong as the mountains, Sigurd Snake in the Eye with a mark of prophecy, and Hvitserk, whose story is tangled in both blood and shadow. But Ragnar was not just falling in love and slaying monsters. He did what Vikings did best. He raided. He led men in daring attacks across England, Ireland, and France, his ships streaking up rivers, his warriors striking like storms. Towns burned, churches trembled, and monks gripped their crosses in fear. One of the earliest and most famous tales puts Ragnar at the raid on Lindisfarne in the year 793, the spark that many call the start of the Viking Age. Whether or not Ragnar himself was there, his legend always stands in the storm's eye. His greatest feat, though, was the siege of Paris in the year 845. With a fleet of 120 longships and thousands of men, he sailed up the Seine and brought the city to its knees. King Charles the Bald, a name as memorable as the moment, paid Ragnar 7,000 pounds of silver just to leave. Some say Ragnar did it to impress a slog, who warned him not to get too proud. It's a tale of war and love, each as fierce as the other. Every hero's journey bends toward tragedy. The old stories say Ragnar sailed for Northumbria with too small a force, was captured by King Aelle, and thrown into a pit of venomous snakes. Did he cry out? Never. Instead, he laughed in death's face, reciting poems of his deeds, boasting that his sons would avenge him. And so they did. Ivar, Bjorn, Sigurd, and Hvitserk, those dangerous, unforgettable sons, gathered what the Anglo-Saxon Chronicle called the Great Heathen Army and swept across England. King Aelle was said to be executed by the Blood Eagle, a gruesome and maybe mythical ritual, not for gentle dreams, but a warning to all who would defy them. Was Ragnar Lothbrok real? It's a question that echoes from every cold stone and smoky saga. Scholars wonder if he was a blend of many true Vikings, their stories stitched into one giant of a man. But his sons, Ivar the Boneless and Bjorn Ironside, especially, were real enough. They made the world tremble. So Ragnar's legend, even if built on myth, became real by the fire his children spread. Through the centuries, Ragnar's name inspired kings, warriors, poets, and dreamers. His memory colored medieval Europe's nightmares and ambitions. He lives on not just in sagas, but in every story of wild freedom, of ships cutting through starlit waters, of rebellion against the impossible. So now, dear dreamer, as you close your eyes, picture Ragnar standing at the prow of his ship, cloak flying, the carved dragon's head splitting the mist ahead. Behind him, the night glimmers with stars and possibility. Before him, adventure, love, betrayal, and glory. His heart will not yield, his will is unbreakable, and his spirit sails on, whether he was flesh or just a dream in the heart of the North. Tonight, you are the saga seeker. The North remembers, and so do you. Out in the wild, restless dark, where the North Sea sighs and the moon paints silver lines across the waves, there's a name that lingers, hissing through the mists, Ivar the Boneless. Some called him a legend. Some thought him a monster or a man cursed by the gods. Others whispered he was a berserker, so smooth in battle that he moved like wind and water, always just beyond the reach of an enemy's blade. No one really agreed on what Ivar was, but all agreed he was not to be underestimated. Close your eyes now and step into his world, a place where fate is as sharp as the sea air. Ivar was the son of Ragnar Lothbrok, the very same Ragnar whose deeds and daring set the world on fire. His mother was a slog, mysterious and wise, a woman said to possess magic, maybe even a touch of the divine. The old stories say a slog warned Ragnar, "Wait before you come to me, or our child will be different." Ragnar, proud and stubborn, didn't listen, and so Ivar was born. Some said he had no bones at all, just skin and muscle. Others said his bones were soft and bent like willow wands. He could not walk as a child or run with the other boys. He was carried on shields, on the backs of loyal warriors, watching the world from a place apart. But do not make the mistake of pity. What Ivar lacked in strength, he more than made up for in mind. Where others flexed their muscles, Ivar sharpened his thoughts. He became a master of strategy, a true genius of war and politics. It was Ivar who led the great heathen army, a wave of Viking warriors who swept across Anglo-Saxon England in the year 865. While other Vikings were content to raid and burn, Ivar thought bigger. He wanted kingdoms, not just loot. He watched, waited, planned, and then struck. When his father was thrown into a pit of snakes by King Ella, Ivar did not rush to battle. He played a longer, colder game. He pretended friendship, tricked Ella into dropping his guard, and then struck like a serpent himself. Legend says Ella was executed with the infamous blood eagle, a punishment so brutal it chills the blood even now. Real or not, the tale endures, a story of revenge as fierce as the northern wind. Ivar didn't stop there. He became a kingmaker, installing rulers, brokering deals, bending England to his will. City after city fell. York, East Anglia, Mercia, all bowed before him, sometimes by sword, sometimes by treaty. He could make allies as quickly as enemies, and betray both when it suited him. His mind was flexible, cold, and always moving. But England was not enough. The old Irish records, real historical accounts, speak of a Norse king called Imar who ruled Dublin and dominated Ireland and Scotland. Many believe Imar and Ivar were the same person, a shadow over the green hills and rocky shores. From Dublin, Ivar led raids into Scotland, Wales, and far beyond. His ships as swift and silent as a gathering storm. And when it came time to die, Ivar left as much mystery as he had in life. Some say he died peacefully, surrounded by gold and loyal warriors. Others claim he fell in battle, or that his body was so frightening that it was buried in secret, in a place no one would dare disturb. One legend says that when a foreign army once dug up his grave by accident, a curse fell on them and they were destroyed, proof, perhaps, that even in death, Ivar was not to be taken lightly. So who was Ivar the Boneless? Was he a real man who changed history? A mythical hero born in the dreams of poets? Or a mix of many fierce men blended into one unforgettable legend? Maybe it doesn't matter. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, his ship sails once more, cutting through the moonlight, the drums of his warriors echoing across dark waters. He was soft where others were strong, but he was stronger for it. He was still when others raged, but his mind blazed brighter than any fire. His body may have been weak, but his will ruled empires. Listen now to the gentle thrum of oars, the hush of the sea, the distant laughter of Viking warriors. In that place between myth and memory, Ivar the Boneless lives on, forever brilliant, forever feared. Long ago, before maps were drawn and the world was split into neat pieces, when the forests whispered ancient secrets and the seas tied distant lands together, a boy was born in the chilly north. His name was Bjorn, and before long the world would call him Bjorn Ironside. Bjorn's story began like a saga carved into stone. He was the son of Ragnar Lothbrok, the dragon slayer, the raider of cities, a king who strode through legend as easily as through the snow. His mother was a slog, daughter of the hero Sigurd, who killed the dragon Fafnir, and the legendary shield maiden Brynhild. Imagine the stories whispered at their family table, with brothers like Ivar the Boneless, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, and Fitzurk. Bjorn grew up in a world where glory was expected, and weakness had no place. He was not the cleverest like Ivar, nor the most ruthless. But he was the strongest, the bravest, the kind of warrior whose courage echoed across the sea. They called him Ironside because swords seemed to break against him, axes bounced off his mail, and arrows slipped harmlessly past. Maybe it was magic, maybe pure strength, or maybe fate itself. No one dared ask. Bjorn sailed on many raids with his father, especially to the wild coasts of West Francia, where Frankish knights and townsfolk soon learned to fear the dragon heads on Viking prows. Young Bjorn watched and learned, not just how to fight, but how to lead. He saw how Ragnar inspired men not just with silver, but with dreams of immortal fame. Then Ragnar died, thrown into a pit of snakes by King Ella of Northumbria, and Bjorn's world changed. Together with his brothers, Bjorn gathered the great heathen army, the largest Viking force ever seen. They crossed the sea to England, not for gold, but for vengeance. They burned cities, shattered armies, and finally captured King Ella himself. The story says he was executed by the terrible Blood Eagle, a message no one could mistake. But revenge was not enough for Bjorn. His restless heart yearned for new worlds, While his brothers stayed to rule in England, Bjorn looked to the sun-drenched south. By the middle of the 9th century, he was no longer just a prince, but a seasoned sea king. He joined forces with another famous Viking, Haystein, and together they launched one of the boldest adventures in all Viking history. Their fleet, some say more than 60 ships, sailed not just around the edges of Europe, but right through the Strait of Gibraltar into the heart of the Mediterranean Sea. Think of it, Vikings under bronze skies, among olive trees and marble cities, where the air smelled of spices and strange flowers. They were no tourists. Their first stops were Algeciras, Cadiz, and Seville in the great Muslim kingdom of Al-Andalus. The locals fought fiercely, but Bjorn and his men were wild as northern storms. They sacked, raided, and moved on, leaving fire and fear behind. Then, incredibly, they turned south and attacked cities in Morocco. It's one of the few times Vikings raided the African coast. Even there, their ships found harbors and their axes found treasure. And still, Bjorn's journey wasn't over. The most famous story tells how they set their sights on Rome, or so they thought. In truth, the city was Luna in northern Italy, a place grand enough to fool the Vikings. Unable to break through its walls, Bjorn and Haystein hatched a wild plan. Haystein pretended to die. His warriors, playing the part of grieving followers, begged for his body to be buried inside the city, according to Christian rites. The townsfolk, moved by their devotion, agreed. Inside the city walls, Haystein leapt from the coffin, alive and roaring, and Bjorn's warriors stormed the gates. Luna fell in chaos and flames. Did it really happen? Maybe, maybe not, but what a tale. If it's not true, it should be. Danger was always close. In southern France, King Charles the Bald blocked the river mouth, trapping Bjorn's fleet inland. So what did Bjorn do? He burned his own ships, sent up a smoke cloud, and rebuilt a new, smaller fleet to escape by a side channel. Like a Viking Houdini, he turned defeat into victory, wild and clever to the last. Years passed. Bjorn returned north not as a mere raider, but as a king. He ruled the land around Lake Mälaren in Sweden, founding the powerful house of Munster. Some say he brought back the riches and wisdom of the world, building trade, forging alliances, and shaping the future. He became not just a breaker of walls, but a builder of kingdoms. How did Bjorn die? No one knows for sure. Some say he died old and rich, surrounded by sons and gold in his great hall. Others say the sea finally claimed him, his longship slipping beneath the waves he loved. Some whisper he sleeps beneath a great mound at Munster, sword in hand, ready to rise if the world should ever need him again. Bjorn Ironside was more than a man, he was a force. A dream that sailed farther than any horizon, a prince, a warrior, a legend, and at last, a king. His story proves that Vikings were more than raiders. They were explorers, builders, dreamers, and rulers, whose names still echo in the winds of the north. Now let your mind drift on salt spray and starlight. If you hear the beat of oars or the clash of iron in the night, do not fear. It's just Bjorn Ironside, riding the endless tides between legend and eternity. once when the world was only half known, when maps ended in monsters and the sea stretched out like an unanswered question, there lived a man whose hair burned as red as new blood and whose temper could melt the Arctic ice. They called him Erik the Red, and he earned that name in every way. Erik's story begins around the year 950 among the deep fjords and snowy peaks of Norway. He was born Erik Thorvaldsson, son of Thorvald Isvaldsson, a man who had already learned what exile felt like. Thorvald, it turns out, had been sent away from Norway for manslaughter. So the family crossed the sea to Iceland, that wild frontier where volcanoes rumbled, winds howled, and the people were as tough as the land itself. Erik grew up wild, fierce, and flame-haired, his beard as bright as fire, his gaze cold enough to freeze a man mid-sentence. In the harsh world of Iceland, he learned to stand tall, to fight for his place, and never to bow his head even when trouble came knocking. And trouble with Erik was never far away. On his farm with his wife Jodhild and their children, among them a curious, bright-eyed boy named Leif Erikson, Erik soon found himself feuding with his neighbors. Arguments flared, tempers snapped, and true to the family pattern, violence followed. Erik was declared guilty of manslaughter, and so, like his father, was banished, not just for a year, but for 3 long years. But Erik did not mourn, nor did he hide. Instead, he looked west, toward the edge of everything. There were whispers of a strange land beyond the sea, a place first glimpsed by a sailor named Gunnbjorn, who had been blown off course by a storm. Erik saw opportunity. He gathered his crew, loaded his ships, and sailed out into the wild, icy unknown. What he found was a world of rock, ice, and silence, a land where glaciers rose like sleeping giants, and the wind howled through empty valleys. Erik named this place Greenland, and with that single word, he showed himself a true genius of Viking persuasion. Who would not want to live in a place so green? He reasoned, knowing well that the coast was the only spot where green outshone the white. He returned to Iceland with stories of rich fields and promise, and in the year 985, he led a fleet of 25 ships back to Greenland. Only 14 made it, the rest claimed by storms or the sea, but those who survived carved new lives from the frozen ground. Erik ruled as chieftain, building a homestead at Brattahlid and shaping a community at the edge of the known world. He was hard, sometimes harsh, but fair, the kind of leader who could make even the most impossible place feel like home. The winters were brutal, the land unforgiving, but the dream of freedom, of owning land and forging your own fate, drew people to him. At home, Erik's story was far from quiet. His wife Jodhild embraced Christianity after their son Leif returned from overseas, but Erik, stubborn and proud, refused to abandon the old gods. He believed in Odin, Thor, and all the old ways. A church was built, but Erik would not step inside, the old world and the new, side by side beneath a cold northern sky. Erik the Red never went back to Iceland, never converted, never apologized for his wildness or his anger. He died, they say, around the year 1003, perhaps felled by sickness, perhaps by sorrow, perhaps simply by the cold that not even he could outlast. Maybe he died like an old wolf, lying down in the snow to watch over the land he had claimed. So who was Erik the Red? He was many things: outlaw, explorer, founder, and father. He turned exile into opportunity and carved a home at the edge of the world. His restless, fearless spirit gave the world Greenland, and through his son Leif, the first footsteps of Europe in North America. His story is proof that sometimes the wildest, most stubborn souls leave the deepest mark, shaping the world not by following the rules, but by breaking away from everything safe and known. Now, as you drift to sleep, let your dreams wander to icy shores and smoky longhouses, to the crackle of fire and the silent falling snow. Remember, even those who don't fit in, those who burn too brightly, who fight too fiercely, can find a place, even if it's at the very end of the map. In the land of snow and smoke, where wolves sang to the northern lights and the cold sea carved the shores like runes from the gods, there was once a quiet boy named Leif. He wasn't born to be a conqueror or a king. He was meant for something different: discovery. Leif Erikson was born around the year 970 in Brattahlid, Greenland, on the very edge of the known world. His father was Erik the Red, fierce and stubborn, the founder of Greenland and the wildest spirit in the north. His mother, Thiodhild, was strong and wise, gentle where Erik was flame. From his earliest days, Leif walked where the land ended and mystery began. He learned to sail icy waters, to hunt in blizzards, to read the stars and the moods of the wind. He was thoughtful, careful, and always curious. While his father was bold and loud, Leif listened to the world and watched the horizon. When Leif grew to manhood, he journeyed east to Norway, the homeland his family had been forced to leave. There, he entered the court of King Olaf Tryggvason, a ruler with a strong hand and a Christian faith. Leif was open-minded and brave. He listened to the king's words, and when Olaf asked him to carry the new faith home, Leif accepted. He set sail for Greenland with priests and holy books, intending to bring Christianity to his people. But the sea has its own ideas. Somewhere along the way, Leif heard rumors, or perhaps met a lost sailor who had glimpsed a strange coast far to the west, a land with wild grapes, tall trees, and gentle winters. Other Norsemen had seen it from afar, but none had dared to land. Leif dared. Around the year 1000, with 35 companions, Leif Erikson set his sails into the unknown. They crossed stormy seas, dodged icebergs, and followed seabirds and the pull of the stars. One day they saw land, green, lush, alive with rivers and forests, nothing like the bare stone and ice of Greenland. They called it Vinland, the land of vines, for the wild grapes growing there. Today, we think it was Newfoundland, or perhaps another spot along the North American coast. Leif and his men built shelters and spent the winter exploring, hunting, and fishing. They found new animals and may have met the native peoples, the Beothuk or others, sometimes friendly, sometimes wary. For a season or two, the Norse lived in this new world. But the call of home grew stronger than the promise of adventure. They packed their ship with timber, fruit, stories, and dreams, and sailed east, becoming the first known Europeans to set foot in North America, over 500 years before Columbus ever set out. When Leif returned to Greenland, he became a legend. He was called Leif the Lucky, not just for his voyage, but for the life he led. He kept his promise to King Olaf, bringing Christianity to Greenland. His mother embraced the new faith and built the first church in those cold lands, known in sagas as Th Jodhild's Church. But Erik the Red, true to the old gods, refused to follow, and the family, like the world, stood between two ages. Leif never became a king. He didn't seek power, nor did he rule with iron. He was an explorer, an inspirer, a quiet changer of destinies. He died in Greenland, likely around the year 1020, his grave lost to time, but his memory as strong as the salt wind. His true monument is the story of Vinland, a whisper of possibility that would echo through centuries. Leif was the son of flame, but he carried wonder instead of war. He listened for secrets, turned rumors into reality, and led the way for every explorer who followed. Tonight, as you drift between waking and dreaming, remember, not all heroes wear crowns or swing axes. Sometimes the gentlest hands, the most curious hearts, shape the world in ways that outlast any throne. In the land where the snow is deep and the winds carry stories older than the mountains, the name of Freydís Eiríksdóttir still glimmers, fierce as fire and cold as northern steel. She was the daughter of Erik the Red, the wild chieftain who carved Greenland from ice and exile, and the sister of Leif Erikson, the explorer who would touch the unknown shores of a new world. But Freydís was never content to live in the shadow of men. Her legend, wild and raw, is hers alone. Born in the settlement of Brattahlid, where the sea glittered with promise and danger, Freydís grew up where survival was a battle, and pride was as necessary as breath. From the start, she was known for her blazing temper, her courage, and her will to claim her place in a world that rarely made room for women with voices like thunder. The sagas tell us that, when the chance came to voyage west into Vinland, the lush, distant world her brother Leif had found, Freydís did not hesitate. She struck her own bargain with two Icelandic leaders, Helgi and Finnbogi, and set sail with her own crew. Their agreement was uneasy from the start. Tension, suspicion, and old rivalries simmered beneath the surface as they built their camps in this wild, green land far from home. According to the saga of the Greenlanders, conflict soon boiled over. Words became threats, threats became violence, and in a night of cold fury, Freydís ordered the massacre of her rivals. When her followers hesitated to kill the women of the other camp, Freydís herself took up an axe and finished the bloody work. She then swore death on any who would reveal the truth back in Greenland. Was it true? Or was it a story shaped by fear, by male storytellers uneasy with a woman so unbreakable? No one can say for sure. The sagas were written centuries later, and Freydís was neither angel nor devil, but something far more real, a survivor who would not be tamed. Yet her legend is not only a tale of violence. The saga of Erik the Red tells of another journey to Vinland. There, when the Norsemen were attacked by the local people, chaos and terror swept through the camp. The Vikings began to run, all except Freydís. Heavily pregnant and unarmed, she refused to flee. Instead, she seized the sword of a fallen warrior, tore open her dress, and bared her chest, beating it with the flat of the blade. With a howl that shook the air, she faced the attackers alone. According to the saga, the sight was so fierce, so wild that her enemies turned and fled. Fact or legend? The truth is lost, but the image endures, a woman with life inside her, meeting death without fear. Freydís fades from the records after these voyages. We do not know how she died or where she lies buried. No runestone marks her name, and no saga gives her an ending. But that is perhaps as it should be. Her legacy was not in kingdoms won or gold gathered, but in a single, burning truth. She refused to be silent, refused to be broken, and claimed her fate for herself. Was Freydís a hero, a villain, or something between? She was fierce and flawed, brutal and brave. She sailed when others stayed behind. She fought when others fled. She was not content to watch history pass. She stormed into legend, leaving the world scorched and changed behind her. As you settle into sleep, with the winds of the north whispering outside your window, remember Freydís Eiríksdóttir, not as someone who followed, but as one who led, who roared, who carved her own name into the story of the world. Sometimes, the strongest hearts burn hottest in the coldest lands. In the green valleys and sharp blue mountains of medieval Iceland, where the wind sings across the fields and the law was spoken beneath the open sky, there once lived a man named Gunnar Hamundarson of Hlíðarendi. His name stands for strength, loyalty, and a tragic kind of beauty. A hero whose story still glows like the northern sun on a summer night. Gunnar was born in the 10th century, the son of Hamundur, a good family but not royal. He was not crowned, nor chosen by fate for a throne, but by his own hand and heart he became unforgettable. What set Gunnar apart was not just his unmatched strength or his skill with weapons, but a rare balance. The soul of a poet in the body of a warrior. Tall, broad-shouldered, with striking eyes and a smile that could calm storms, Gunnar was famed across Iceland for a single feat. He could leap his own height, even fully armed, and even backwards over his shield. He was the man who could quiet a feud with a word, or spark it with a look. He was not boastful, never cruel, but if wronged, he would fight to the last breath for what was right. His presence at an assembly brought both hope and fear, and his loyalty made allies proud. Gunnar's tale is told in the great Egil saga, a story as tangled and powerful as the fjords themselves. At the heart of the saga is his friendship with Egil Thorgeirsson, a wise lawyer and a man of peace. Where Gunnar was action and steel, Egil was reason and words. Their bond was unbreakable, two souls, each the other's shadow. Gunnar married Hardrada, a woman of rare beauty and sharper pride. Their love burned hot and cold, stormy and passionate, for Hardrada's will was as fierce as Gunnar's own. Though he tried to avoid the endless feuds of Iceland, trouble always finds a hero. Gunnar fought, sometimes in self-defense, always with honor. But honor is a sharp path, and even the noblest must pay a price. Soon the storms of blood feud gathered around him. And Jarl, ever the voice of peace, urged him to leave Iceland for 3 winters, as the law allowed, to let tempers cool and vengeance fade. Gunnar agreed. He packed his things, said farewell, and rode away from Hlithrendi. But as he crossed the ridge and looked back at the valley, his home shining beneath the endless Icelandic sky, fields waving in the wind, sheep like soft clouds, he stopped. He turned to his friend and spoke words that would become legend. "The hillside is so fair, I will go no further." With that, he broke the law of exile not for pride, but for love of home, for beauty, for roots that ran too deep to cut. The price for this choice was fate. His enemies, free now to hunt him without fear of law, gathered and came for him. Gunnar stood alone in his farmhouse, arrows raining, spears breaking, fighting with the strength of 10 men. He loosed arrow after arrow, his bow singing death. But when his bowstring snapped, he turned to Hardrada and asked for strands of her long, golden hair to mend it. She looked at him coldly and said, "I remember the slap," recalling a time when he had struck her in anger. She refused. Weaponless, surrounded, Gunnar fought on, standing tall at his doorway, a storm of steel and courage. He fell at last, surrounded by the bodies of those he had slain, his blood watering the earth he loved. Even his enemies mourned him, for they knew greatness when they saw it. In the centuries since, Gunnar Hamundarson has become more than a man. He is Iceland's Achilles, its Hector, a symbol of doomed nobility, of a heart torn between home and safety, love and pride, friendship and fate. His story is not just about glory, but the price we pay for honor, for choosing beauty over exile, truth over comfort. So tonight, as you close your eyes, let the winds of Iceland carry you to that bright hillside. Let the memory of Hlithrendi, the fields and the sky, whisper through your dreams, and remember, not all heroes win. Some simply stand where they belong, no matter what it costs. In an age when the North still roared with the thunder of dragon ships, when kings were crowned by the edge of a sword and legends walked the frozen earth, there lived a man named Erik, a man who would come to be called Bloodaxe. His story is carved from both glory and tragedy, a saga of ambition, steel, and exile. Erik Haraldsson was born into fire and frost, a son of Harald Fairhair, the first king to unite Norway beneath a single crown. But Harald's kingdom was also a family of many, more than 20 sons, born of different wives and concubines, each one a potential rival. In such a world, to survive was to fight, and from an early age, Erik proved himself bolder, fiercer, and more ruthless than his brothers. His gaze could chill a hall. His blade ended arguments before they began. His journey to power began with blood, the blood of siblings. To clear his path to the throne, Erik did what Viking princes sometimes did. He killed his brothers, one after another, until he alone stood as king. For a short time, Eric Bloodaxe ruled Norway, wielding his axe with iron will. But Norway was wild, its people proud and stubborn, its petty kings quick to rebel. Erik ruled with force, determined to stamp out opposition, but his reign sparked more fear than love. Soon a challenger appeared, his half-brother Håkon the Good, raised in England and skilled in diplomacy as much as war. Håkon's kindness, charm, and the blessing of the English king won over the people. Eric was forced into exile, driven from the land he had fought so hard to rule. Yet exile did not end him. Across the sea, in the rugged kingdom of Northumbria in England, chaos reigned. It was a land divided by old rivalries, Saxon kings, Viking settlers, and endless shifting alliances. Into this storm stepped Eric Bloodaxe, wearing exile like a cloak and bearing scars both seen and hidden. The English king, Athelstan, saw in Eric the perfect tool to keep the North in check. A Viking, powerful but outcast, to balance the scales. Eric became king of Northumbria not once, but again and again. He was crowned, then cast out, then crowned once more, his reign always threatened by betrayal and shifting loyalties. He held the kingdom by the blade, fighting enemies on all sides, ruling with the same force and fury that had both made and destroyed him in Norway. By his side stood Gunhild, a woman as sharp and dangerous as any blade. Some called her a sorceress, others a queen of intrigue. She was a mother of kings, a partner in war and council, famed for her cunning, her fiery words, and her will to match Eric's own. Together, they were a force of legend, royal, ruthless, and in the end, doomed. In the year 954, Eric's storm came to its end. Surrounded on the bleak hills of Stainmore, betrayed by those who had once called him king, Eric and his loyal followers made their last stand. They fought with the courage of men who know there will be no tomorrow. Eric Bloodaxe fell there, sword in hand, the final breath of the Viking kings in England. His grave is lost to time, but his name echoes in poetry, in fear, and in the awe of generations who remembered the last Viking king. Eric Bloodaxe was a man of shadows and fire, a king who rose by the axe and fell by the sword, a brother slayer, an exile, a ruler who lost it all but never lost his spirit. He is the storm before silence, the memory of the old world as it gave way to the new. So now, dear dreamer, as you slip into sleep, let your thoughts drift with Eric across cold seas and wild hills, through the rise and fall of kings, where loyalty and betrayal, power and loss, are all written in blood beneath the northern sky. Far to the north, on an island carved by wind and fire, where the ocean never rests, and the sky can change from thunder to sunlight 100 times before midday, there lived a man who was storm and song in one body. His name was Egil Skallagrímsson, a killer, a poet, a father, a wanderer, a man who belonged to every shadow and every sunrise of his age. Egil was born around the year 910 in Iceland, when that wild land was still young, settled only a few generations before by exiles and adventurers from Norway. His father, Skallagrim, was a chieftain famed for his strength and the dangerous darkness in his blood. His mother, Bera, was sharp, wise, and steady, a woman who did her best to temper the wildness in her son, though even she could not stop the storm inside him. Egil was no ordinary child. While other boys played with carved sticks or chased sheep in the grass, Egil spoke in verse. At 3 years old, he was already composing skaldic poetry, not simple rhymes, but complex, twisting lines that carried the rhythm of the sea and the bite of the wind. At a feast, denied a drink, he fired off a poem so sharp the room fell silent. It was his first victory, and many more would follow. By 7, Egil had already killed another boy in a quarrel. The sagas don't call him a monster, but they don't hide his fury either. He had the soul of a berserker, a rage that burned in his bones and could turn cold just as quickly. Yet within him was also a gentler force, the ability to mourn, to love deeply, to give grief a voice that rang across ages. As a young man, Egil sailed with his brother Thorolf to Norway. Trouble found him as it always did. Norway was then ruled by Eric Bloodaxe and his fierce queen, Gunhild. If there was anyone less tolerant of Egil's wild spirit than his own father, it was Gunhild, the so-called Mother of Kings. The feud between them began with a single, stinging insult at a feast, and spiraled into a cycle of revenge and poetry, each act answered by a blow or a verse. Egil's enemies were many. He fought duels, killed rivals, and when the king ordered his death, Egil used the greatest weapon he had, his words. Condemned and about to die, Egil begged for a single night to compose a poem. What he created, the head ransom, was so clever, so beautiful, that it softened even the heart of King Eric. Egil was spared proof that, sometimes, poetry is mightier than the sword. He wandered far, fighting alongside kings, making enemies and allies in equal measure. He fought in the famous Battle of Brunanburh in England, winning the favor of King Athelstan and gifts of gold and land. But wherever he went, Egil brought storm and story. He raised a curse bowl on a hill to hex his enemies. He sang laments for lost friends, verses as dark and deep as the sea. Yet the greatest saga of Egil's heart is not of battle, but of sorrow. When his own young son drowned, Egil's grief was bottomless. He refused food, refused words, until finally his pain found its shape in poetry. The result, Sonatorek, the loss of a son, is one of the earliest, most raw expressions of personal grief in all European literature. Egil does not blame his enemies or the gods. He simply mourns, fully and honestly, his tears becoming a song for the ages. Egil aged, but never truly softened. Blind and bent, he could still thunder out his verses from memory, shaking the halls with his voice. He lived his last years at Borg, the estate his father had built, surrounded by kin, saga, and the echo of a life lived fiercely. When he died, Egil was laid to rest with treasure. But his true legacy was the poems he left behind, the stories told in every hall and by every fire, and the memory of a man who was as dangerous with words as with the axe. So who was Egil Skallagrímsson? A berserker with a harp, a warrior whose grief became poetry, whose fury became legend. He conquered no kingdoms, but shaped Iceland forever through verse, through rage, through love. His story is proof that to be unforgettable, one must live every moment with nothing held back. There once lived a king whose voice could command armies. whose vision united lands and hearts, and whose name, centuries later, would flicker in the blue light of your phone. His name was Harald Bluetooth, and his story is one of connection between gods and kings, pagans and Christians, past and present. Harald was born in Denmark, sometime between 910 and 920, into the great hall of King Gorm the Old. His father was a fierce ruler, a die-hard pagan who ruled with the old gods on his lips and the weight of tradition on his shoulders. Harald's mother, Thyra, was known for her clever mind and her role in strengthening the realm. The kind of woman who could see both tomorrow and today. From boyhood, Harald was pulled between two worlds. The North still sang with the names of Thor and Odin, while Christianity swept in like a new wind from the south. Some kings dug in their heels. Others saw the world changing and wondered how to ride the wave. Harald was one of those rare rulers who could see both sides, who knew that to survive, he would need to do more than wield an axe. He would have to build bridges. Harald came to power after his father's death around the year 958. His father Gorm refused Christianity even when it might have brought peace, but Harald was pragmatic. He saw the value in uniting his people not just by the sword, but by faith. Not long after he took the throne, Harald announced Denmark's conversion to Christianity. Whether he did so from belief or from a ruler's instinct for survival, it changed the world. Churches sprang up, missionaries arrived, and runestones, like the famous ones at Jelling, were carved to immortalize the shift. One stone still reads. King Harald ordered these monuments made in memory of Gorm his father and Thyra his mother. That Harald who won all of Denmark and Norway and made the Danes Christian. But Harald's legacy wasn't only spiritual. He was a unifier, a builder, a king who understood the power of walls and words alike. He fortified Denmark's borders with the massive Danevirke and built the great ring fortresses, Trelleborgs, whose perfect circles still baffle historians. These were more than strongholds. They were a message to friend and foe alike. Denmark stands united, a kingdom woven tight. Harald was just as adept at forging alliances as wielding steel. He navigated the tricky web of European politics, shaking hands with holy men and warriors, kings and traitors. He kept peace with the Holy Roman Empire when he could, and made war when he must. Always he was the thread tying worlds together, pagan and Christian, north and south. Now about that name, Bluetooth. The old stories say Harald may have had a darkened tooth, blue or black, from injury or decay. Some say he just loved blueberries or strong drink. Whatever the truth, the name stuck, and 1,000 years later it stuck again. When Scandinavian tech engineers in the 1990s were looking for a name for a wireless technology to connect devices, they remembered Harald Bluetooth, the king who united warring tribes and helped them talk to each other. The symbol on your phone is a bind rune, combining his initials, H and B, in Old Norse runes. For all his genius, Harald's reign didn't end with peace. In his later years, he faced rebellion from within, led by his own son, Sweyn Forkbeard. Sweyn, ambitious and impatient, rose against his father. After years of struggle, Harald was wounded in battle and fled, dying in exile among the Slavs. He never returned to Denmark. His crown passed to his son, but his legacy remained. A united kingdom, a Christian Denmark, and a name still glowing in blue beside your headphones. So who was Harald Bluetooth? He was a warrior and a peacemaker, a builder and a dreamer, a king who dared to imagine a world bound together, not by force alone, but by something greater, connection. He stood at the crossroads of faith and tradition, of stone and story, and left his mark deep enough for technology to remember. Not every king gets to be a logo, but Harald Bluetooth does. Now, as you drift to sleep, let the soft glow of your devices carry you back through time, past signal and static, to the memory of a king who found unity in a divided world, and stitched together the very fabric of the North. In the dawn of the 11th century, while Viking lords still raided monasteries and wrestled for wind-blown coasts, there rose one man who dared to imagine an empire as broad as the sea. His name was Cnut, sometimes written Cnut, and where others wanted gold or glory, he wanted it all. He would become not just king of Denmark, nor just Norway or England, but all three ruler of the North Sea Empire, a domain so vast it seemed stitched together from mist and thunder. Cnut's story, like many legends, begins in the shadow of another. His father, Sweyn Forkbeard, the first Viking to truly conquer and hold England, and his mother, Swiatosawa, a Polish princess with royal blood. Cnut was born around the year 990, likely in Denmark, and grew up between sword and scripture, Viking tradition and Christian politics. From the start, he moved between worlds, learned their tongues, understood their secrets, and waited for his moment. That moment came in 1014, when Sweyn died and Cnut found himself in England with an army and a dream. But the English weren't eager to be ruled by a Viking. They drove Cnut out and called back their own king, Ethelred the Unready. But Cnut was not so easily pushed aside. He sailed home, raised more ships, gathered new warriors, and returned to England the next year, this time not to raid, but to conquer. His campaign was relentless. Battle by battle, Cnut swept through the land, until he faced Edmund Ironside, son of Ethelred, in a showdown at the Battle of Asandun in 1016. Rather than destroy his rival, Cnut chose diplomacy, agreeing to split the kingdom. Edmund would rule the south, Cnut the north. But within months, Edmund died, perhaps by illness, perhaps by darker means, and Cnut became king of all England. Unlike other conquerors, Cnut didn't act as a foreign overlord. He kept the English laws, respected their traditions, and married Emma of Normandy, widow of Ethelred, to solidify his claim. He kept peace with the church, paid tribute, punished only those who stood against him, and made the land his own. While he ruled in England, he also held Denmark and in time claimed Norway from its rivals, uniting them all in a personal empire that gleamed like steel above the waves. For a shining moment, the North Sea was a Viking lake, and Cnut its master. He presided over a court where Danish jarls, English earls, and Norse chieftains sat side by side. He minted coins, built churches, sent envoys to the Pope, and traded with lands as far as Byzantium. Cnut may have had a Viking's blood, but he ruled with the mind of a diplomat and the steadiness of a king. Of all the tales about Cnut, none is more famous or misunderstood than the story of the tide. It is said that Cnut, tired of hearing his courtiers flatter him as if he were all-powerful, had his throne set on the shore and commanded the rising tide to halt. Of course, the sea ignored him, washing over his feet and robes. Cnut turned to his followers and declared, "Let all men know the power of kings is nothing beside the power of God." It wasn't pride, but humility, a reminder that all rule has its limits, and even the greatest must bow to something beyond themselves. Cnut died in 1035 at the height of his power in Winchester, his capital in England. After his death, his empire began to unravel. His sons, Harald Harefoot and Harthacnut, could not hold it together. England returned briefly to Anglo-Saxon rule, until William the Conqueror arrived and changed the course of history again. But for that brief, bright time, Cnut the Great showed the world that a Viking could be more than a raider. He could be a king, a peacemaker, a bridge between old and new. So who was Cnut the Great? He was no wild berserker, no brute. He was the storm that became the shore, a conqueror who learned to rule, a king who made peace, a man who united kingdoms and remembered that even the greatest cannot command the tide. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, remember the king whose empire sparkled across the cold waters, whose rule was both strength and serenity, and whose wisdom echoes still. No crown is higher than the waves, and no king commands the sea. In the year 1015, beneath leaden skies and the call of gulls over Norway's cold shores, a boy was born whose name would become thunder in the sagas. His name was Harald Sigurdsson, but the world would remember him as Harald Hardrada, Harald the Hard Ruler. Harald's childhood was forged in chaos. Norway, then, was a land of blood and ambition, torn between ancient pagan ways and the Christian faith his own half-brother, Olaf II, fought to bring. From his earliest days, Harald was surrounded by stories of gods, kings, and battlefields, of men who carved their destiny with axe and will. At only 15, Harald joined Olaf in the legendary Battle of Stiklestad, where Olaf tried to reclaim his throne. The clash was brutal. Olaf fell, his army was broken, and Harald, wounded and just a boy, barely escaped with his life. He vanished into exile, but exile for Harald was only the beginning. He made his way first to the courts of Kievan Rus, where Prince Yaroslav the Wise ruled. There he learned diplomacy, war, and survival among strangers. But soon, ambition carried him further, south to Constantinople, the shining heart of the Byzantine Empire. Harald joined the Varangian Guard, the emperor's own elite Viking warriors, and there he thrived. He fought in Sicily, Bulgaria, even the Holy Land, leading armies, storming cities, gathering vast treasures, and building a legend that stretched from the icy north to the sunlit Mediterranean. The Greeks called him Aralds, his comrades called him brother. He fought revolts, crushed enemies, and true to his wild heart, may have even taken part in palace intrigues, and broken a few hearts, too. Harald sent his gold home, plotted his return, and when nearly a decade had passed, he sailed back north, richer and more formidable than ever. In Norway, Harald returned not to a vacuum, but to a kingdom ruled by his nephew Magnus the Good, Olaf's own son. Instead of plunging the land into civil war, Harald did what clever kings do. He bargained, sharing the throne until Magnus's sudden, suspicious death left Harald the sole ruler. Now King Harald ruled Norway with iron resolve. He was not just a warrior, he was a poet, a skald, and his verses, sharp, proud, and sometimes mournful, still survive. He built fortresses, strengthened trade, tamed the nobles, and fought Denmark to a hard-fought stalemate. His rule was stern, but left Norway stronger than he found it. But the restless fire in Harald never died. In 1066, a beacon was lit. The English throne stood unclaimed after Edward the Confessor's death. Harald, ever hungry for greatness, joined forces with Tostig, the exiled brother of Harold Godwinson, England's most powerful earl. With a fleet and 10,000 men, Harald invaded England's north. At Fulford, he crushed the English defenders, and for a moment the north seemed his. But fate had one last twist. Harold Godwinson marched his army nearly 300 kilometers in just 4 days, catching the Norwegians by surprise at Stamford Bridge. Many of Harold's warriors were unarmored, basking in the autumn sun, but Harald was undaunted. He leaped into battle, swinging his massive two-handed sword, towering above his men. For a time, he seemed invincible, until an arrow pierced his throat, and the last great Viking king fell, not fleeing, not defeated, but fighting with all the fury of his ancestors. 3 weeks later, Harold Godwinson himself would fall at Hastings, and William of Normandy would seize England's crown. But Harold's death at Stamford Bridge was the true end of the Viking Age. With him died not just a man, but a storm, the last echo of the old world, of skalds and shield walls, of kings who won their crowns with poetry and blood. Harald Hardrada, king, poet, warrior, wanderer, bridged the time between saga and history. His story is written in fortresses and verses, in rivers of gold and fields of battle, in the memory of every dreamer who ever wished to chase the horizon. So now, dear dreamer, as you drift to sleep, imagine him at the prow of his ship, sword flashing, voice raised in song. The last thunder of the Vikings rolling away across the ages, forever echoing over the northern seas.